Howdy everyone, and welcome back to this tutorial series. In the previous video, we managed to display the image in our job card component, and so far we have a job card component that works well. It does the job, presents the data, but you agree with me, it doesn't look pretty, does it? So in this video, we're going to learn how to style the job card component using Tailwind CSS. And in order to do this, unlike other videos where we are coding live, this is in this video we're gonna just I'm gonna walk you through how to do this, how to design this, so that we can and I think it's the best use of your time actually. So I'm just gonna switch to the branch where we have designed this, and you see automatically we see the final result, and I'm going to walk you through step by step everything that we are doing in this code to make it look like this instead of doing it live. And I think it's a better format. It's gonna save a lot of time, and it's going to be very comprehensive still. So I'm going to collapse the terminal. Okay, I'm going to collapse everything, every element. All right, collapse the left and the right, and then I'll collapse this as well. So let me quickly walk you through, like, conceptually what's happening here. As you can see, from a layout point of view, we have this left-hand side, okay, and we have the right-hand side, okay, and within each of these subsections, on the left side we have kind of two subsections, and similarly here, which are stacked horizontally, whereas on the right hand side we have two subsections that are stacked vertically, right? And in the left side subsection, this second one here also is a block of it's a block that contains two blocks. And similarly here, we see that here we have two blocks, and even here we have three, because this is one block, this is another one, and this is another one. And if you look at the whole, at the bigger level, okay, we can see that some, especially like if it's a feature job, we see that it has this yellow background and a yellow border, and it has this featured widget here. And if it's not a feature job, you can see that it has a white background and a gray border, and it's not very visible, I think, but there's also a shadow, okay, and it's very visible. I think it's visible on the last one here. There's a shadow, and it may not be very visible because, like, for the tutorial we already have, like in our tutorial canvas, we already have this grayish color here. Everything else is a layout. Like this here is the layout, this is the layout, and the canvas and everything that is related to this tutorial is in this gray canvas here. So let's see step by step what's happening, and we're gonna go top down. So we're gonna start at the top level and drill down the component hierarchy tree and see what's going on. So as you can see here, the topmost level, we have this shadow, like I said, and this is basically where I'm hovering here. We have a shadow here. So if it's not the most visible thing, but if I remove it, you will see that there's a difference. You see, we no longer have the shadow. So look at here, look at what's going on here at the top, at the bottom here, where I currently have my cursor. If I put it back, if I put the shadow back, you see we get our shadow back, okay? And then here we also have this rounded small. If I put it to long, you see that it's going to be a little bit, you see, the corners are a lot more round, and I think we can even say round full, okay? It's going to look even more round, you see, right? So this is what defines the corner. But obviously in this case, to be consistent with our styling, we want just small. And the border, if I remove this, you see that we will no longer see the border, okay? See, no longer visible. And now this is the padding. It's basically the padding X is like the padding that you want horizontally, and padding Y is the padding that you want vertically. Basically, the padding defines how much space within your element itself you want to define, you want to have. So if I say 0 here, you see that we won't have any space horizontally anymore. So the innermost elements are going to be almost like without space. And if I do the same here, I remove here, you see we collapse everything, right? So there's no longer inner space. Basically, the difference between padding, this is not a CSS course, but basically the difference between padding and margin is that margin defines what the other element, the other element nearby. So let's put a margin here. So you see if I put margin, and if I don't define which side, it's going to put margin everywhere. You're going to see that it's going to add margin almost every. Oops, I need to put some space. All right, you see that's the margin here. Okay, but obviously in this case we don't want to add a margin, you just want to add a padding. Okay, now you see also that in the case of a feature job, depending if it's a feature job or not, we want to add a different color for the background and the border. Okay, so if it's a feature job, as you can see here from this ternary expression, if it's a feature job, we want to add a border that has an amber color of 300, and if it's not, we want to add a border that is slate made. Basically that's Tailwind way of saying gray. So if I maybe like put here to 900, you see that it's going to be a lot more darker, right? It's going to be darker for non-featured jobs, right? But we want to be consistent with our design, so I'm going to put that back to 200, and that's it for this like outermost design. The look and feel of our card, both for feature jobs and for non-feature jobs. Now we get into this other div here, okay, and you can see that this is the div that actually controls like the layout that we have here. So it's telling, especially in the case, and also this is a responsive design. So just to be, and Tailwind uses the mobile first design system, meaning that this in the beginning, this is not a flex component. And in the beginning, I mean, when you're looking at it in the mobile version, this is not the flex. As you can see here, things are not flex, right? But if I go on the desktop version, okay, then this flex element, this flex utility applies, okay? And justify betweens basically means that, okay, the left, as you see here, we have left and right, we have two divs within, and the left is basically this part here, the right is this part here, okay? And what justify between says is that we want to have an equal like an even space between these two elements. The other alternatives are, for example, justify center, where we want them at the center, but that's definitely not what we want, okay? The other option is justify start. Okay, we don't want that. Basically, it means that when you say justify start, it says, okay, the Tailwind that's applied is that we're going to split the content into two, and each sub block is going to start at the beginning of like it's going to be like we're going to split it into two sections like this. Actually, let me go to the Tailwind documentation and show you what I mean. It's going to be a good idea to add that here. Let me search for justify center. Okay, voila, see this? So it basically tells that we want to have those elements centered, okay, the sub elements, and justify between. If I go to justify between, you see the difference. That's how it looks. It's very different. Okay, and in this case, obviously, it's justify between that we want. And you can also have like space around, justify around. Basically, it tells Tailwind that you want to have like let's put back here. Let's put say justify around. Okay, obviously that's not what we want, right? We want justify between. Make it look great. Very good. And then item center. Basically, when you have a flex element, okay, because this element itself is a flex, right? It's within a flex. No, it's not a flex. Yeah, it's a flex element. Okay, when you are on a viewport that is like desktop size, like, and items center defines how we want our element to look on the vertical axis, like how we want them to be spaced on the vertical axis. You have basically if justify between tells how we want to the items within the flex to look on the horizontal axis. Item center tells how we want them to look vertically, right? So if I put here, in this case it won't be very visible because the items are more or less of the same size. Okay, they're more or less of the same size, but item center, if I go to the Tailwind docs again and I search for items, item center, okay, you see this exactly like I was saying, right? So if you have elements that have a different like different heights, item center basically says that okay, along in the cross axis, basically the vertical axis, okay, we want them to be centered vertically. But in that case, whatever the height is, we want everything to be always centered, right? And that's why we're using items centered. Right, so that's it here. And then the next thing we have is space. Okay, it basically defines like the amount of space we want to have vertically within our inside our elements. And you can see that in the case of in a desktop viewport, we want to put that to 0. In a mobile viewport, we want to put that to 4. Okay, so if I go back to the view to viewing it in mobile, okay, and if I put this to 0, you see that we will lose the space. You see, the elements are now very like they're aligned, like there's no space anymore, right? That's what is happening here. Obviously, in the case of in the case when we are viewing the element on the desktop, okay, we don't need a vertical space because we are already putting the flex here, so they're displayed horizontally, and we don't need to put any vertical space. But we do need to put some horizontal space. It's not necessarily very useful here because we're already using justify between, which is already pushing the two things apart. So down we jump into the left side of the component, which is this section here, okay? And as you can see, like I said, it's also in and of itself a flex element, right? Because you see here that we have one section here, okay, which is just the image, and then another section that is just that is the basically the title of the job and a few information about the job, full-time, the experience level, and the city. Okay, now if I open this, okay, you see that's exactly what's happening. The first thing is the image, and then the second thing these elements that I mentioned earlier, right? So in case of the image, you see this is basically telling Tailwind the width that we want. So if I increase this, you see that the width will increase, exactly, right? Similarly, if I increase this, the height is going to increase. It's not going to be very visible because the images are very small anyway, okay? And this shrink element is basically telling Tailwind to never shrink, right? Like the image is already small enough, like 9 pixel by 9 pixel, so we never want to shrink. And by shrinking, it's let's go here so you can see. Let me show you. Let me type shrink. shrink. Oops. Okay, flex shrink. Very good. So basically, shrink when it's set to true, you see this shrinks, right? So this is the default, and it's gonna shrink. But when you set to no, don't shrink like we are doing here. Basically, if I collapse this, I reduce the size, it's never going to shrink. Instead, it's going to add a vertical and horizontal scroll here, and it's never going to shrink this element here. And that's exactly what we're doing here with the image. We're saying that we never want to shrink the image. Okay. The next thing we have is like we have a margin top for the image. Okay. If I put the 0 here, or if I put to, okay, let's put to 9 or 10. You see, we have a big margin at the top. Obviously, we don't want that. We want 9. We want it to 1, and that's it. And I think it looks very beautiful like this. So that's it for the image section. And then if I go to the links, sorry, yeah, the other one. The first thing we have is the link. Okay, this is a link. If you click here, you're gonna go to the actual job. Obviously, we want that to be very bold. So that's why we have a text. That's if I put here to let's say 100, it's gonna be very gray. Sorry, it's gonna be very light. Okay, but definitely that's not what we want. We want that to look very clear. It's the most important thing of the card to know the job title. Okay, and then font semi-bold basically defines like the boldness of the text. Okay, we want that to be quite bold. Okay, so if I go to bold here and I look at the font weight, these are the different attributes that you can have for the font weight, and we are using something that's quite bold. We can even go further if I use extra bold. Okay, gonna look much more bold than it is already, right? But I think semi-bold is just fine. It's perfect. It looks well. Then that brings us to the next section, which is what we have here. And you see that in this case, in this div, we don't necessarily need to put a flex here, because by default, the way CSS like HTML works anyway is by stacking things one on top of another, especially if these are block items. So that's why this div will take the next line. Okay, so that we don't necessarily need to do another flex here. Okay, but if we had like inline items that are displayed as inline element by default, we may have needed to add a flex, an extra flex here, and put it as a flex call, as we will do, as you see, we will do here. So here we want text small. Basically says we want this, it defines the size of the text. Okay, so it's the font size. So if I come here to text small, you see, defines the size. No, not this. Text small. I'm looking at the font size. Font size. All right, let's look at this. All right, so you see, it's basically it's like the second, like this is the smallest text you can have, but this looks just fine. If I go, maybe I increase this to XL. Let's try to do that. You see that the text, the size is going to increase dramatically, and it's not what we want, obviously, right? And this, you already know this is the color. Okay, so if I put, let's say, indigo here, it's going to change completely. All right, but we want the gray to be consistent with our design so far. Okay, so that's it for this section. And obviously inside we are using simply JavaScript to put those slash and display different information: the job type, the experience level, the city, and if it's a remote job, then we add remote OK. If it's not, then we don't add this, right? So that's why, for example, here you don't have remote OK, but for this job you see remote OK, and same for this one, right? Then that brings us to the right hand side of the design, which is basically this other part here. And like I mentioned earlier, with Tailwind, I mean with CSS in general, when you're adding a flex element, you can define along which axis you want the items to be stacked, right? By default, items are stacked horizontally. So like flex without the flex call, like we did in this on the left side, will stack things horizontally. So the first items on the left, and then the next one, and so on and so forth. But here we are saying flex, and then we say flex call as well. Basically, we are changing the axis that Tailwind uses, right? So we are saying, okay, the first one we want to put it at the top, and then the next one just below it, and so on and so forth. So let's say I even duplicate this, okay? You're gonna see that it's gonna just add it just one more, right? You see, it just stacks on top, but obviously that's not what we want, so I'm going to remove that. Okay. Now the other thing that we're doing here is that the very important thing is that we're saying items end. Let me say for example, I say item start. You see the difference, right? So items end basically, first of all, when you use flex call, okay, you're changing the axis, the usual meaning, the default meaning of what item start mean, of what items start means. In this case, we used item start, but it was defining, like, let me put back to end first, okay? When you put flex call, okay, items on a hyphen, instead of referring to how you want things to be aligned vertically, now refers to how you want things to be aligned horizontally. Basically, you're switching everything 90 degrees around, right? So now items end, item start will say I want them to be horizontally to start at the beginning, and items end I want them to be at the end. Or you can even have item center, okay? But that's not what we want, right? We want items end to make a nice looking, a nice looking layout, right? And here you already know this is the text size, this is the text color, okay? So this is very simple. Now, when you enter this is again another flex element, right? A flex within a flex. And this is not a flex call. This is a horizontal flex, and we want things to be item centered, right? Item centered. And again, because this is not a flex call, item centered means we want things to be centered vertically, right? We want things to be, so if let's say one of these items had a big height, let's say height of 20, things are going to be centered still, right? Actually, maybe I'm doing something that is changing that somewhere here, but basically that's what it means here. Item centered, we want those items to be centered, yeah, vertically, okay? And then the next thing that I think is important here, italic, right? This one is easy. You can see if I remove this, it's not going to be italic anymore. If I put it back, okay, it's italic, okay. The next thing that I think is important, the feature job, right? This one here. This is the last thing I want us to have a look at. Okay, so and again, we only add it if this job is a feature job. So we first check if it's a feature job, and if it's the case, then we render this other widget here. And what is going on here? Well, the first thing is that we want this text to be very small. It's not a very important thing. The next thing we want is the next important thing I guess is that we want this div, the div that contains this element, to be fully rounded. So if I remove this, okay, and I put small, for example, it's going to be squared. I don't know if you can see it. Let me zoom a little bit so you see. Say it's squared, right? It's now squared, but obviously that's not what we want. We want that to be rounded. Okay, sorry, we want that rounded full. So I'm going to put that back. Okay, and then text center. Okay, text center. We want the text within that div to occupy the center of the div. And the padding, like you already know, is defines like how much space we want, like in that, if how much space we want padding X horizontally. So if I increase this is going to be a big, it's going to be, because it's going to look very big. I think padding, this is not the default value. Okay, now this 20 is a default value. You see now this is very big. Obviously that's not looking good, and I can put it also on the horizontal, on the vertical. You see this is not looking good at all, right? So let's switch back to the default value. Yeah, and then yeah, background amber 10 100. If I put this to 600, it's gonna be not visible anymore, because it's gonna be the same color as the text itself, which is obviously not what you want, right? So I'm gonna revert that back to 100 to make the thing stand out, but still let the text be visible. And yeah, we have a third, like you can see here, we have basically three sub elements. We have the div here. Okay, we have this thing that is optional, not everything has it. Okay, so if I switch, decrease the size again, not everything has this featured image, featured job widget. And then the button, basically, which is allowing the user to bookmark. So yeah, it's very simple. You have a button element, and then inside you have, this is just source. It's Tailwind way of adding like things that are not going to be displayed on the front end. And then you have the SVG. SVG is a topic in and of itself. I'm not going to jump into that, but basically this SVG is the proper SVG to use to display this nice bookmark icon, right? And with that, we have reached the end of this video. As you can see, Tailwind is very comprehensive as a technology, right? It's very comprehensive as a technology. Makes CSS, in my opinion, very fun to work with. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I see you in the next one. Bye.